Do you remember when horror movies felt like roller coasters? You go in, the lights would go down, and the whole experience felt like it was a competition to see how many times the movie could make you spill your popcorn during the 90-minute runtime. Loud violins, slamming doors, and cats flying out of cupboards every 5 minutes, man.
What's in here?
It was anything but subtle, but it worked. At least it worked for a while. And then something very weird happened. The horror movies that everybody was talking about weren't the ones with the most screams anymore. They were these slow, miserable little anxiety attacks from a studio called A24. Movies like The Witch, Hereditary, and Midsummer. They barely even pretended to care about jump scares, but they still managed to mess people up for days. So, today I want to talk about how that happened. Not in this A24 literally killed the jump scare, it's gone forever, RIP kind of way, but in this more, sense that they made this constant cheap scare thing feel cheap, like they were beneath modern horror.
Talk to me.
If your movie was just loud noises and hallway monsters now, it almost felt outdated next to a crying Toni Collette staring at you for 2 minutes straight. Before we get to A24 though, we kind of have to talk about how we overdosed on this stuff. For a long time, jump scares were the easiest metric. More jumps equals scarier movie. The 80s slashers used them, the 2000s studio horror boom absolutely mainlined them, and you'd get this very predictable quiet, quiet, bang pattern so often that you could practically set your watch to the, to when the soundtrack would go dead and the camera would start creeping in.
Hearts, 8 of spades, 2 spades, jack of diamonds, jack of clubs.
There's even data to back this up too. Check this out. The Washington Post looked at how many jump scares movies cram in and found that they really ramp up across the 80s and 2000s, and then they hit this serious decline in the mid-2010s. You can literally see the line go up during the Scream Factory era and then start dropping off during the era where elevated horror kind of starts. And if you're hanging out online at all during that period, you can feel the backlash in real time. Horror fans were calling jump scares cheap and lazy and the lowest form of horror all of a sudden. All that good internet poison talk. People didn't want to be just startled anymore. They wanted to be upset and bothered. They wanted something that would stick around after they left the theater, not just another cat jumping at the camera. That's the environment that A24 walked into. A24 basically took the kind of horror that had existed on the fringes, this slow, metaphoric, atmosphere-heavy thing, and branded it as this cool, grown-up version of a scary movie. Critics started calling it elevated horror or post-horror, which is a whole nother debate, but the idea was this was horror that cares more about grief and trauma than about, body counts and loud stingers. Think pieces talk about A24 horror as movies that value atmospheric dread and experiments in craft over traditional payoffs like masked killers and loud jump scares. And whether you like that framing or not, it stuck around. I think they were right. If a movie had that slow, unsettling energy and an artsy poster, then people just assumed it was an A24 film, even when it wasn't every time. I want to look specifically at 3 movies and how each of them do this in their own way. The first up is The Witch, or The Vivitch if you're hilarious. The movie that feels like someone filmed a nervous breakdown in the year 1630. The Witch is one of those films where, depending on who you ask, it's either one of the best horror movies of the decade or literally nothing happens for an hour and a half. And honestly, both of those reactions kind of prove the same point, I think. This movie refuses to play the old game. There are almost no traditional jump scares in The Witch. There's no loud stingers, no cat in the window fake outs. What it is instead is just silence. There's a lot of endless shots of these endless woods and these creaking trees and this family that's just falling apart under their own religious blight and paranoia. You're just sitting there waiting for something to lash out of the darkness, and it mostly never does. You get scenes where the camera just stares at the tree line and your brain starts inventing its own shapes out there. Or moments with Black Phillip that are just two people talking in a barn, but the way that it's framed and the way that it's lit makes the conversation feel like a satanic jump scare in slow motion. The Witch is basically proof of concept that you can deliver a classic horror tone that is grim and supernatural and heavy, even without the roller coaster structure from the era that came before it. It scared people, it was critically adored, and it did that while acting like jump scares were literally beneath it. And then A24 doubles down on that with Hereditary, which is where things get very messed up. If you've seen this movie, then you know exactly what I mean. Hereditary is probably the clearest example of how A24 didn't really delete the jump scare entirely as much as it did starve it. It's frequently called one of the most disturbing films of the last decade. Most of the movie plays like a domestic drama with something horrible rotting just outside of the frame, and you can tell it's there, but it almost never shows itself. You get these shots where the camera lingers on dark corners of the ceiling for like way too long. Nothing moves, there's no music, and then finally, your eyes register that there is something there. I think that realization is much scarier than any loud sting could have been. You've also got the dinner scene, which has, no supernatural activity, but it still manages to be one of the most stressful things that A24 has ever made. It's just people screaming about how miserable they are.
Yeah, fine, release me, just say it. Just fucking say it. Don't you swear at me, you little shit! Don't you ever raise your voice at me! I am your mother!
Now, Hereditary absolutely does have a couple of brutal jump scares, and those are infamous enough that sites make lists of A24's scariest jump scares, and Hereditary is right up there at the top on every one of them. But the reason why they hit like this giant, inevitable car crash is because the movie isn't peppering you with these warm-up jolts every 5 minutes. When something finally does snap, it feels actually catastrophic. So Hereditary doesn't come in and say, jump scares are bad, actually. It says, no, they're too powerful to waste, and it demotes them from the main feature to a punctuation at the end of a very long and well-earned sentence. Then there's Midsommar. They're just showing off at this point. If The Witch and Hereditary prove that you don't need constant jump scares, then Midsommar proves that you don't even need the dark at all. Dude, almost the entire movie takes place in blinding daylight, covered in these beautiful flowers with people smiling right at you. There is no cheap, what's hiding in the shadows feel, because there are no shadows. You get to see everything. The horror comes from the fact that they're doing awful things to people in front of you, as calmly as possible too, like it's just another tradition. These long, unbroken shots of rituals play out with this weird and clinically calm way that's more upsetting than a sudden scream is. And at the center of that is Danny's relationship with, grief, basically. The movie is basically about a person who's drowning emotionally, and then she finds a group that says, we will feel that with you. It's kind of both comforting and horrifying at the same time, and it's doing way more damage to you psychologically than any loud noise ever could, man. People walk out of Midsommar debating if the ending is cathartic or monstrous, whether the cult was evil or if it actually gave Danny something that she didn't have and wanted. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. So did A24 actually kill the jump scare? I think so. Not literally. There are still plenty of other horror movies out there that are definitely throwing ghosts at the camera like they're dodgeballs, dude. But in the space that A24 made and operates in, the stuff that critics call elevated horror, the movies that people dissect and think pieces and film essays, talk about, these constant jump scares kind of feel embarrassing now. Writers talk about A24 as saving horror through atmospheric dread and auteur-driven weirdness, specifically contrasting it with the formulaic jump scare machines of the 2000s. And if you look at the timing, the big rise of this style lines up with that measurable drop of jump scare density across mainstream releases. Now, A24 didn't flip the switch alone here, but it did become the face of a horror that just never needed to be loud. Jump scares still work, though, when they're earned, I think. A good one is usually tied to a character or to a turning point in a story, when it's attached to something you care about. I think Hereditary proves that perfectly. The scare that happens in there isn't like this big boo moment. It's everything in this family just changed forever, and your stomach knows it before you do moment. So when I say A24 killed the jump scare, what I really mean is, and walk with me here for a minute, A24 took the cheap version out back and retired it. It turned the jump scare from this entire personality of a horror movie into just one tool in a much nastier toolbox. And now, I think that's the real question for us as horror fans. Do you actually want to scream 10 or more times in a movie theater and then forget the movie on the way home? Or do you want something like The Witch or Hereditary or Midsummer that maybe only really scares you once or twice, but quickly moves into your head and starts changing your brain chemistry? Because personally, I think A24 made their choice. And judging by how many of these slow and delightfully miserable movies that you and I are still talking about years later, a lot of us went right along with them. Hey, if you like this video, then you'll love the one that you're about to watch next. Just tap the screen to check it out, and I'll see you in the next one.